There is a particular kind of tragedy that the world never fully understands. It is not the tragedy of a man who never made it, never found fame, never got the chance to prove himself. It is the tragedy of a man who had everything, who stood at the very top of American entertainment for 3 full decades, who made hundreds of millions of people laugh every single night before they went to sleep, and yet, when the end came, there was almost nobody there. Johnny Carson died alone, not figuratively, not as a metaphor for celebrity or the emptiness of fame, literally, painfully, quietly alone. And the saddest part is that he would have wanted it that way, because Johnny Carson spent his entire life building the perfect wall between himself and the rest of the world, and by the time that wall was finished, there was nothing left on the other side of it. To understand how a man like that ends up dying the way he did, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Not the beginning that the public knows, the dazzling suits and the monologues and the effortless charm. You have to go back to a boy in Nebraska who learned very early that the safest place to be is somewhere nobody can reach you. Johnny Carson was born on October 23, 1925, in a small town called Corning, Iowa, but his family moved often and eventually settled in Norfolk, Nebraska, where he spent most of his childhood. Norfolk was not a place that promised anything dramatic. It was quiet, unremarkable, and slow, the kind of town where nothing much happened, and nobody expected much to happen either. And Johnny fit right into that stillness, though not in the way most people imagine when they think about the man he would eventually become. He was not a bold kid. He was not loud or theatrical or desperate for attention the way you might expect from someone who would one day command the biggest stage in American television. He was shy. He was withdrawn. He kept to himself in a way that went beyond simple. Introversion. There was something deeper underneath it, a kind of emotional retreat that had started long before he ever understood what it was or why it was happening. School was not a place where Johnny found warmth or connection. He did not play sports. He did not run with large groups of friends. He sat quietly, read books, and practiced magic tricks in his room for hours at a time. Magic became the thing that saved him in those early years, not because it made him feel special in front of others, though it sometimes did, but because it gave him something to do with his hands and his mind while the rest of his emotional life stayed locked away. When he performed tricks for neighbors or schoolmates, he was not really trying to dazzle them. He was trying to disappear into the performance itself, to be the magician rather than the boy, to exist in a space where feelings did not have to come into it. The reason Johnny Carson became the way he did starts with his mother. Ruth Carson was not a warm woman. People who knew her described her as cold, critical, and emotionally unavailable in a way that left a permanent mark on her son. No matter what Johnny achieved, whether it was good grades or successful shows, or simply being a decent and obedient child, Ruth never gave him the one thing he actually needed from her, which was the feeling that she was proud, that she saw him, that he mattered to her in a real and lasting way. She was a controlling presence in the household, and her coldness was not something Johnny could escape or work around. It was simply there, constant and heavy, like a weight he carried without ever being able to set it down. His father, Homer Carson, was a power company manager who worked steadily and without drama. But he was emotionally passive. He was not cruel. He was simply not there in the way a child needs a parent to be there. Between a mother who withheld affection and a father who was present but emotionally absent, Johnny grew up in a house where love was never really spoken or shown. He learned something in that house that he would spend the rest of his life unable to unlearn. He learned that letting people see what you actually feel is dangerous, that the safest way to survive is to keep everything inside, to smile on the outside, and to never, ever let anyone close enough to hurt you the way the people who were supposed to love you already had. By the time Johnny Carson left Nebraska, he had already become two people. There was the version of himself that the world would see, charming, quick, funny, and seemingly confident. And there was the real version, the one that lived quietly behind all of that, guarded and uncertain and deeply, persistently alone. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1943 at 18 years old during World War II. He had hoped to become a pilot, but the war ended before that happened, and he spent his time instead as a communications officer. The Navy did not change who he was at his core. It gave him discipline and structure, and it gave him more opportunities to perform for audiences, entertaining his shipmates with magic and comedy routines. But the rigid social environment of military life was not a natural fit for someone who preferred solitude. Johnny followed orders. He did his job. He kept his head down and his feelings even lower. When the Navy was finished with him, he was a little older, a little more skilled at hiding, and no closer to the kind of emotional life that most people take for granted. After the Navy, he went to the University of Nebraska, where he studied radio and speech. It was there that his talent for performing became undeniable. He worked at local radio stations, learned the rhythm of live broadcasting, and began to understand that his voice and his wit could hold an audience. He moved to California, started writing comedy, and eventually landed a hosting job on a daytime game show called Who Do You Trust in the late 1950s. The show was small and low budget, but Johnny's presence on it was impossible to ignore. He was fast. He was clever. He had a way of filling silence that made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. And that, more than anything, is what got him The Tonight Show in 1962. He was 36 years old when he took over, and he would hold that position for 30 years. 30 years of being watched by millions of Americans every single night. 30 years of being one of the most recognizable and powerful figures in television history. And not a single one of those years changed the fundamental thing about him that had been true since he was a boy in Norfolk. He did not know how to let people in. The Tonight Show made Johnny Carson a household name, but it also made the contradiction of his life harder to ignore. On camera, he was everything an entertainer could hope to be. He was relaxed, sharp, funny, and completely in command of the room. He could read an audience the way a musician reads a crowd, instinctively and effortlessly. Guests loved performing with him, even if they were sometimes nervous about it. The viewers loved him unconditionally. He was a nightly companion for an entire generation of Americans, someone they looked forward to seeing before they closed their eyes. But the moment that camera light went off, a different man emerged. Offstage, Johnny was quiet and guarded in a way that surprised even people who had worked with him for years. He avoided parties. He turned down social invitations. He did not keep many friends, and the few people who were close to him often said that even they could not fully reach him. He could be generous and kind on a good day, and then cold and distant the next, with almost no warning in between. He hated interviews almost as much as he loved performing them. He once said, in a rare moment of honesty, that if he had never become a television star, he would have been perfectly happy working in radio, where nobody could see his face. That comment revealed something important about the man behind the monologue. Fame was not what he wanted. The stage was simply the only place where his loneliness did not feel quite so heavy. Johnny Carson was married 4 times, and every single marriage followed the same painful pattern. It would begin with excitement and hope, and it would end with silence, distance, and a woman who had finally accepted that she could not reach him. His first wife was Jody Merrill Walcott, a college sweetheart he married in 1948. They had 3 sons together, Christopher, Corey, and Richard, who went by Ricky. But even fatherhood did not pull Johnny out of the emotional shell he had built around himself. He worked constantly. He was rarely home. And when he was there, he was present in body but not in spirit. The marriage dragged on for 15 rocky years before ending in divorce in 1963. His second marriage, to Joanne Copeland, lasted 9 years and ended the same way. Joanne later described him as emotionally closed off, a man who had no idea how to show love. His third marriage, to Joanna Holland, ended in a way that shocked even those who thought they knew him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, during a dinner that should have been a celebration, Joanna handed him divorce papers across the table. She had planned it deliberately because she knew that a direct emotional conversation was something Johnny would never willingly have. The settlement was over $20 million, one of the largest celebrity divorces of that era. His fourth and final marriage to Alexis Moss in 1987 was quieter and calmer than the others. Alexis was younger, kept out of the spotlight, and did not demand the kind of emotional openness that had destroyed his previous relationships. Friends described their marriage as more of a partnership than a romance, a comfortable arrangement between two people who had made peace with the limits of what they could offer each other. Alexis stayed with until the end. But even she could not fully get past the wall. The greatest pain of Johnny Carson's life came not from his marriages or his feuds or his drinking, but from the loss of his youngest son. Ricky Carson had inherited something of his father's creative spirit. He loved photography and nature, and he had a sensitivity about him that set him apart. But Ricky also struggled in ways that Johnny never publicly acknowledged. There were mental health challenges. There was substance abuse. His life was unstable in a way that Johnny, for all his wealth and influence, could not fix. Partly because fixing it would have required the kind of emotional engagement that Johnny had spent a lifetime avoiding. On June 21, 1991, Ricky died in a car accident in Los Angeles. He was 39 years old. He had been driving along a hilly road, trying to take photographs for a nature project, when he lost control and the car went down an embankment and struck a tree. The crash killed him. Johnny released a brief statement expressing his sadness. That was it. No interviews, no public appearances of grief, no tears shed where anyone could see them. But people who were close to him said something broke inside him that day, something that had already been cracked for a very long time. He carried guilt about Ricky. He regretted the distance. He blamed himself quietly and privately for not being the father his son needed him to be. But he never spoke about it. Not to friends, not to a therapist, not to anyone. He buried it the same way he buried everything else, deep and silent and out of reach. Carson's relationship with alcohol ran alongside his loneliness like a shadow. He was not the kind of drinker who made scenes at parties or stumbled through public appearances. He drank quietly, consistently, and often in private. It was a way of managing the stress and the anxiety and the persistent feeling of being alone in a crowd of millions. But alcohol did not soften him. It sharpened his edges. People who worked with him learned that a drinking Carson could turn cold and cutting without warning. He could be verbally cruel in ways that went beyond humor, targeting people who had disappointed him with remarks that left marks. He had run-ins with the law over the years, including DUIs, but because of who he was and how valuable he was to NBC, most of those incidents were handled quietly and never reached the public. The network protected him. The industry protected him. And Johnny let them because the alternative was letting people see the truth, and that was something he had spent his entire life refusing to do. When Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in May of 1992, he did not fade gradually. He simply stopped. There were no farewell tours, no guest appearances, no occasional cameos to keep his name in the conversation. He walked off that stage, and he meant it when he said he was done. He moved into a quiet life in Malibu with Alexis, sailing on his yacht, reading, listening to music, and seeing almost no one. He turned down invitations to awards ceremonies, tributes, and milestone events honoring his legacy. The public barely saw him again. His health was declining by then, though almost nobody knew it. He had been smoking heavily since his teenage years, and by the late 1990s the damage had caught up to him. He developed emphysema, a serious and progressive lung condition, and later heart disease as well. He kept all of it private. No press releases, no hospital drama, no dramatic final act for the cameras. On January 23, 2005, Johnny Carson died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 79 years old. There was no public funeral, no celebrity eulogies, no memorial service open to the fans who had loved him for 30 years. He had requested privacy in death, just as he had demanded it in life, and his family honored that wish completely. Johnny Carson left this world the same way he had lived in it. Quietly, carefully. At a distance from everyone, including the people who loved him most. The boy from Nebraska who learned to hide behind a smile never stopped hiding, And in the end, the wall he had spent a lifetime building was the only thing standing between him and every person who ever tried to reach him. It held. It held all the way to the end.